now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Hey, Becky, thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome, one and all. It's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. I am he. And this week, by the way, in case you have any suggestions, and we've had some people who have sent in suggestions for guests, and we're trying to follow up on them, so we welcome you to do so. For any comments that you may have, you go to www.tedwallachin. That's WOLOSHYN. Got a lot of spelling differences over the years, trust me. WOLOSHYN.ca. And you can send in your suggestions, and we appreciate that for guests or themes or whatever it may be, or comments, negative or positive. We accept them and appreciate all of them. The fact that you're listening, we appreciate that very much, and our sponsors are there as well. But anyway, so this week's guest is certainly no stranger to television audiences across this great land. Imagine, if you will, somebody says to you, "What do you do for a living?" You said, "Well, I'm the host of a radio or television show." What television show is that? Have you heard of a thing called This Hour Has 22 Minutes? Well, it is, to use the word iconic in regards to a television program, this fits perfectly, because it is. This Hour Has 22 Minutes is sponsored by the greatest talent in this country. He's also the star of a hit show called Son of a Critch, which is based on an award-winning memoir, oddly enough, titled Son of a Critch. And Son of a Critch, the television program, begins its third season on January 9th on CBC and CBC Gem. Welcome, Mark Critch.
Hello.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Great, thanks. How you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for taking the time when we were busy schedule.
My God. My great pleasure. Thank you.
I had an opportunity to watch episode 1 of season 3, and I was very entertained.
Oh, great. Thanks for taking the time.
It took me back to my youth.
And the experiences.
Great. Except that, the interesting thing, I mean, this is a seminal a moment in time for this young lad, because he's going into grade 9, but this is junior high. So grade 9 is the top of the heap.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to here in Ontario, when I went to school, grade 9, you were at the bottom of the heap.
Yeah, no, it went 7 to 9, and then he moves to another school if there's another year. But in my life, high school was 10 to 12 then in St. John. So this is him kind of saying goodbye to this world he's finally found a place in.
Yeah, and it's he gets to sit in the back seat, back row of the bus.
Yeah, it's a big moment. He's a grown man, a made man, as they say.
Yes, exactly. Well, it is when you think about it. I mean, it's at that age where you sort of go from boy to young man and girls to young ladies, right? Where clothing isn't something that you just put on you to stop being naked and to keep warm. It's clothing that you're now starting to wear to impress the opposite sex.
Yeah, it becomes an extension of yourself, styling your hair. You start to, shoes and jackets and things like this all become very important. And, you're chasing some version of yourself that you're supposed to be, or you think your peers want you to be, as opposed to who you are. So you're kind of trying to fit in even more, I guess. And it's an amazing time and they all grow at different ages, right? They all mature in the class at different times. So it's lots of room for comedy there. They're the most awkward years.
Yeah, and as they put it so fittingly, you're at the top of the food chain.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, getting on that school bus when I was a kid at the start, boy, working your way to the seat at the back of the bus in grade 9. But at the start, I mean, that was a terrifying place, when you're the littlest. But now they're finally the biggest, probably the softest and the weakest of the biggest, but they are the biggest. So they get a little bit of power before they graduate, and all starts over even worse again in high school.
Yeah.
So it's short-lived
Exactly.
fight. Yeah.
I know, that's the thing. It's just you start at the bottom, you rise to the top, then you move to the next level. You're at the bottom, you got to go back to the top again.
And that's life.
And then that continues post-secondary and then post-college or university, where you start at your first job and you're down at the bottom again. And it's this constant roller coaster.
Yeah, I mean, these changes happen in life, and it keeps happening. You know, to come growing pains, but long after you're finished physically growing, you still go through them. And so we see that with Pop and Mom and Dad in the show, and the older brother Mike Jr. coming into his own in adulthood and stuff. So everybody's still growing.
There's some really interesting moments in the show, without giving everything away. I mean, I don't think I could do that anyway, because the writing is very crisp, and you have to see it. I can't tell you what it's all about, but there's the moment where he discovers, as he's sitting there in class, where he can't read the blackboard.
Yeah,
it's like, uh-oh, the dreaded eyeglasses, the most uncool thing for a 13-year-old kid.
Yeah, you get to that point where you finally do feel as though you've reached the top of the food chain, and then boom, it's taken away from you by your own body is exposing you in that way. And that's something that happened to me. And that school is a bit of a tough school I went to, and then having to wear eyeglasses all of a sudden. I mean, you're just a target. Anything new to draw attention to you, and nothing attracts a bully more like glasses at that point. So that was quite it's kind of interesting, though, these things that you go through, and then you get to replay them again, and you get to have a bit of fun with it to kind of exercise that demon from your life in a way. If you laugh at something, it no longer has power over you, so it's great fun to do.
As I mentioned in the intro prior to our chat, that this is based on a book that you've written called "Son of a Critch." So I mean, these are true stories. I don't know how much when you're adapting it to television, how much different it is from the book. Is it pretty much the same?
Well, you know what? I wrote the book, and then when we started writing the series and pitching the series, it's kind of like telling that era of your life, those stories again, but in afresh in a completely different way. Because I mean, I've written for books, I've written for television, so it's like starting over again in a way, and focusing on different things. And in the book, it's the whole book is kindergarten up to grade 12, and this is grades 7 to 9 so far. So you're taking a lot of memories. Some stories might have happened in the 11th grade, some might have happened in the 3rd grade, whatever, and you're kind of adapting them in there, as well as expanding more on the family stories. Probably more than the school stories, because you start to tell those stories and it becomes much bigger and richer, and you end up telling different stories. Like in this, the glasses story is true, getting bullied and then telling the nun that my parents couldn't afford glasses and I never had. That's true. That's something I did and got in trouble, and the nun called the school. And then there's a scene in there where a teacher brings in a life-size crucifix to show what Jesus went through. Cross. That actually happened. A teacher built a giant cross and was late to class, and then later put on a blindfold to show what it was like to live as a blind person. Those two things happened. The teacher's name was Kevin Power. I still know him to this day, but he was always trying to bring a bit of drama to the classroom, so we'd learn more. But the kids it was just ridiculous, so people couldn't stop laughing. So it's neat to have these, as I'm telling this story of what happened in my life, then to pepper it with these other little memories that probably you didn't get into in the book, but are visual. There's such good visual things. So I get a chance to focus on different things and tell other people's stories a bit more. Like my good friend Richie Perez, who's a character in the show, is my best friend in the show. And he was a young Filipino Canadian. I didn't really talk much about our friendship in the book, because it was very obvious, anyone who I knew who I grew up with, who that character would be. He was the only person of color in our school. So he's in the book, but not necessarily named. But then when I was doing the TV show, I thought, I'd like to tell a bit about your story as well. And he said, absolutely. So he signed on. So you get to expand it. And it is, rather than adapting the book word for word, you're really just going, okay, well, put that aside. I'm going to tell these stories in a different medium. And it's been a wonderful experience.
Well, before I even began watching the screener, I've seen some of the shows from the past, but I went to the CBC website, and there's a Q&A thing in there, like a frequently asked questions, and one of them is it for kids? And the answer is some strong language, innuendo, some stereotyping, yelling, lots of bullying from children, and some Catholic nuns. And I thought, I
Well,
thought,
then, the
there's the
Catholic
hook
nuns
right
are the ones
there.
doing all the other stuff.
Yeah. There's your hook right there. And then I turn on and I'm watching the episode, and there comes the nun walking in with a cross with a crucifix, and I thought, oh yeah, okay, here we go.
Here we go.
Now,
Well, you know what? And what I find funny about with kids is I get a lot of young people watch the show, and a lot of people, older folks, and then parents, and a lot of times the parents will watch it for nostalgia and remembering the way their life was, but also identifying with the parents, Mike and Mary. But I get a lot of kids watch it who feel, even though it's set in that time period in Newfoundland, they watch it because they're going through many of the same things,
Yeah.
And especially I hear from kids all the time will come up or write in with comments that they're going through many of the same things that Mark is going through in the show, or young Sophia, who plays Fox, her character Fox. Get a lot of young people identifying with that character, and so it's interesting that way. It's a show that I've heard a lot of families watch together because it's something that the parents can watch and enjoy and take something from, as well as the kids, without feeling like they're watching the parent show or the kids show.
Yeah.
It's something they can come together and talk about afterwards, which is something that folks say is a bit rare these days.
Now, when you watch young Benjamin Evan Ainsworth, who plays young Mark, are there times when you get a sort of a sense of deja vu?
Oh boy, I tell you, many times, and it becomes something else, and you almost forget it's about you for a time, and it's these people playing people in your life, but you are focusing on making as good a TV show as you can. But there are moments when I'm dressed like my dad, and I'm talking to Benjamin, or if I'm in the school and all the kids, that's the exact uniform I had when I went to school. So you see these kids run by, and then something like the nun with the cross, or later on in the season, we have a scene where young Benjamin performs in a bar doing stand-up for the first time, which is something I did at the age of 15. And my dad found out about it and caught me, and there was a big, upset about that. And we were doing that scene, and I was playing my dad walking up on, and Benjamin did the exact same act that I did at the age of 15 in the show. And that was kind of odd, because that to me was very much like being in a memory, And oftentimes with our hair and makeup and our wardrobe people, our set people, they'll say, well, how should the wardrobe look, or how should the set look? And I'll show them a picture or draw, and then they'll like recreate it,
Mm-hmm.
And that's odd too, when you're dressed like your father, and then you're approaching someone dressed as you. But it's wonderful in that way. It really helps me see the story as a whole and to see his perspective and what he must have been going through. And I think it's brought me a lot closer to my dad, thinking about how he would have looked at these situations and trying to sympathize with him.
Now, but I want to talk to you about that, playing your father. But let me just go back to Benjamin here for a second. How daunting do you think it is for him to be playing you, who not only are there on set, but you're essentially his boss, and
Yeah.
and you're on the show together at the same time? That's a lot to rattle around a 14-year-old kid's head.
But he is brilliant, and such a good actor, and such a professional. But I told him right away, day one, I said, look, this is my life story, but it's about a kid who's your age, and you make this kid whoever you want. Don't be trying to replicate me. Make it your own. Make it your own character. You don't even have to ask me anything. Like just play it the way you want to play it. And I said that to everybody because it's not like I'm Winston Churchill or something. You know what I mean? Like people are just going to watch the show for what it is and take it up. But he felt a lot of freedom there to develop his own character. But I did notice, like, my wife was there one day on set, and she says, he's even walking like you. And I said, what? And he was walking with his hands clasped behind his back. And I said, I don't walk like that. And then she said, you're doing it now. And I didn't realize it. I was thinking, I have my hands behind my back. And I said, hey, Ben, are you walking like me? He goes, oh, yes, this is the way you walk. I said, what else do I do? And he was showing me little movements of mine that he'd been looking and mirroring. And I said, stop looking at me. That kind of freaked me out. But I just said to everybody, just make it your own and look at it as if it's a play that you just picked up the script to and take it away because it's yours. And they created really rich characters, I think.
So you didn't sit down with him and show like old home movies and try to get him to
No, none of that. No.
Yeah.
No. And I mean, he's seen enough tape of me just from the comedy stuff I do. But
Yeah.
for everybody else, there wasn't really a video of anybody. Except my brother's a real person, and he, he's a radio guy to this day, and
Yeah.
he's had Colton, who plays him on the show, on his radio show in St. John's as a guest and stuff. So they became quite close, and so he has a good sense of him. But he's very much doing his own character. So I guess the essence and hearts and spirits of the people are very true to those, but they are all themselves. They're all characterizations that the actors have come up with.
And you play your father,
Mhm.
the late Mike Critch, who, for people who don't know, a legendary journalist for VOCM, which is Voice of the Common Man. People wondering,
right.
it's the only radio station in Canada that doesn't start with the letter C, and it's because it was incorporated before Newfoundland became part of the Confederation.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. So in case people were
Yeah.
wondering why the VOCM.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was important to get that. Oftentimes you'd make up a station name for a TV show, but kind of so many people, certainly in Newfoundland and Labrador, knew the station and Dad that I felt we had to pay tribute to them, and they were very kind to let us basically, mock the whole network and everything. But they know it's done with love. But yeah, Dad was born in 1926. He was first started with the Daily News. He actually covered Confederation with Canada for the local newspaper at the time, and in 1949, and then went to work in radio. And he had this Newfoundland accent, and everybody was he was embarrassed because he couldn't really get away from his, what we'd call a towny accent. Late last night, early this morning, most was struck on a Trans-Canada highway, that kind of a thing. And then some people said it, and then the news reporter said the bosses said they were getting such good feedback, the fact that this guy had a regular common Joe, as Dad would say, accent, that they said, don't you dare change it. And so he became quite loved as a reporter in town, and very familiar in a Walter Winchell kind of way, that everybody kind of, kind of a local boy, local hero kind of thing.
Yeah. And
so everybody knew Dad.
From what my research indicates, he was the most trusted man in Newfoundland and Labrador. He's he's kind of like the Lloyd Robertson of the Rock.
Yeah, he would have things where cops would really trust him. And the thing is, I think Dad grew up, they didn't have much growing up, and they grew up in, the 20s and 30s, and Newfoundland was not an easy place. And a lot of the guys who later became cops and even judges knew Dad from the streets growing up, and everybody kind of grew up hard. So there's a lot of trust in each other. And
Yeah.
back then, it was a handshake is, all you needed. And so cops would often say, or judges would often call Dad, and apparently other reporters told me Dad had a locked desk. He was the only one allowed to have a locked drawer at VOCM. And they'd get a call, and someone would say, okay, Mike, you can report that now. And he'd unlock his thing, and drawer, and he'd haul out an already written news report and then deliver it, and it would be a big scoop that the cops had told him, we're doing this whole thing, it's going to happen at this time, this is what's going to be happening. And so he always had great scoops because people trusted him. And that's certainly something I learned from him. I'm very much a handshake kind of person myself to this day, and look people square in the eye and try and tell them the truth. And that's certainly something he did, and he was very well respected for it.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalick's father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long-serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first-class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market, or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you. Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor, or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866-309-0387. That's 1-866-309-0387. Or you can get her at info@etpcanada.ca. That's info@etpcanada.ca.
Now back to Ted Wallachin.
What do you think you would have thought of your version or your version of him, your portrayal?
I think, well, he saw me, like I would do these sketch comedy shows, and I did an impression of Dad when I was a kid, like when I was doing that stand-up act where he walked into a bar and found me in there performing. I was doing an impression of my dad in his red VOCM news jacket that I'd taken from the house. And so I guess he always used to say, "Go for the belly laugh, kid." And he had a great admiration for comedians and for the art of comedy and entertainment in general. He always would come to the shows, and I think he'd be very happy. I think that my parents would be equal parts mortified and proud. Like I could see them say, "It wasn't like that. Why'd you do that? Oh my God, why are you telling people about that?" But then kind of when they talk to their friends on their phone, say, "Did you see the show last night?"
Yeah.
And they were very loved, in town. And I hear that a lot, that I know a lot of people will come out to be strangers too and tell me what they think my parents would have thought of it. And I think people feel in Newfoundland and Labrador, I would hope, and for the most part, the reaction I've heard is people are quite proud of the show and they feel that it represents a place, well, with the humor and the heart. And I think Dad was he had a lot of heart, and I think he would appreciate more so the comedy. We try to leave it with a nice warm feeling in people's tummies when they watch the show and get a laugh and maybe a little tiny bit of a tear in each episode. So I think he'd like that.
And was your brother Mike inspired by your dad's success in radio to go into radio himself?
Oh yeah, my brother, I used to call him a rebel without a clue because he would always try to be rebellious against Mom and Dad, but then he became Mike Critch Jr., who worked at VOCM. And I'm like, "You're rebelling against our parents. You've become Dad. You're exactly Dad." But he was a DJ, and it was interesting because Mike came into radio and in a different way. Dad was news. Mike was music. His big passion was music. And he did take a radio name because you couldn't have two Mike Critches because Dad was so famous. And Dad was a little upset with that, when he took this radio name of Campbell on the air and threw away the Critch family name. There was a bit of going on, but Dad became very proud of Mike and would boast about him a lot. And I think for any parent, I guess if your kid goes into that line of work that you care passionately about, I think it is a bit of a comfort. And in many ways, when they do that, it is a bit of a tribute to you. I mean, we're both broadcasters, myself and my brother. That's very much from looking at that.
And he took the name McDonald, or he took the name Campbell, literally from the can of soup. And, and you see where that can of soup appears in the show. And there's a great line that Malcolm McDowell uses afterwards. He says, "So why Campbell? Why not Mike Chef Boyardee?" Yeah,
it was Boyardee taken, he says. Yeah,
that's right.
And that was because Mike picked that name because he had to. Because they said and Mike was doing production work and kind of fill-in spots every now and then, or a late night shift. So he wasn't even sure that this is what he was going to do. I don't think he thought that he was picking a name forever. He just said, "Oh, I've got to go on there. I'll be Mike Campbell then." And the choices we make, they get set in cement sometimes pretty quickly. And now even to this day, all these years later, Mike's 60 now or something almost, but he's still Mike Campbell, and everybody knows him as that. So careful what you do in life; it might stick.
Yeah. How did you manage to snag Malcolm McDowell? It's just for people wondering, why do I know that name? If you saw the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you'll recognize it from there. A Golden Globe nominee.
Yeah, Malcolm's a fantastic guy. Lots of great movies. If Time After Time, Clockwork Orange, all these things.
Yeah.
And we
I said
reached
One
out.
Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I meant to say Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, Clockwork. Yeah, and he's interesting and he's a wonderful guy. But we'd reached out to. I knew being a Newfoundland thing. Um, we looked all over Canada and different places, and then I thought, well, we should look at Britain. We should look at Ireland and the UK because they are very similar, Newfoundland and Liverpool or what have you, or Dublin. And then we found these casting directors over there who had done Game of Thrones actually,
Really?
and they suggested a bunch of kids. They found us Benjamin, who was amazing as me, and then they said, who might play the grandfather is Malcolm McDowell. And I said, oh, don't be so silly. And they're saying, no, he's looking for like a series that is something he'd believe in, and we think he'd like the script. So they sent him the script. Then he asked for another script, and then he asked for a copy of my book, and then he asked to have a Zoom call with me. And he really connected to the material because he grew up in Liverpool, and places are fairly similar, I guess, in a way. And he really liked the way the character was written. He found it quite interesting sharing a room with a young boy, and the great conversations they'd have. And so we talked about it for a while, and I said, look, man, I can't pay you what you are going to get paid doing something else. It's not going to have the exposure that many of the other things you're looking at are going to have. But I can guarantee you this, you won't be somebody who works for us, you'll be a partner, and I'll do everything to make it be worthwhile, and to be real, and to be worth doing. And
Right.
that's all I can promise you. And he said, I'm in after that. And that was it. And we didn't even talk money. He just said, I'm doing it, to his agent. And then who's on the call? It's like, okay. And then that's the way Malcolm is. And then he shows up, and it's just a wonder to be around, a lovely guy. It's amazing to watch himself and Benjamin because they have wonderful conversations and as peers. He doesn't look down to him as a kid or anything. And it's just magical to watch the two of them act together. And sometimes it's just dead quiet on set. It's just the two of them talking. And I think Benjamin's one of the best of his generation. And I think Malcolm's certainly one of the best of his. So you see these guy who's 80 talking to a kid who's 14 and doing this great scene. You just don't see that very often anymore. And it's just a wonderful thing to watch.
Well, it's that great grandfather, it's that old adage, why do grandchildren and grandparents get along so well? And the answer is because they have a common enemy.
Well, that's true. And you know what? That's very much true in that house, they'll conspire. And, I think neither one of them want to grow up, and so they're trying to hold on to that childlike wonder for as long as they can.
Now, you say you're committed to 13 episodes this season, right?
Yes. Yeah. We shot them all. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you sit down, do you know where you're going to end up 13 episodes in, or is it something, is it more sort of a organic where one episode leads itself to another episode, or are you following the book completely?
Well, it's not really a book because it's more like if I look at that year and the kind of themes I want to get into. So this season I map it out. I know it's the first day of grade 9, kind of get a sense of what that's going to be. I want to tell the glasses story. And then the last episode is him graduating. And they graduate from that school and they're going to leave it behind. And the kids don't know if they're ever going to see each other again because in the other school it's a feeder system. So they might not be in the same class and things like that. So then the nuns picked me to give the speech at the graduation, not because I had the best grades, but they figured I could do a good speech and the Archbishop was going to be there. So they kind of faked that I was a valedictorian. They're like, you're giving the speech. And so it ends with him giving this speech, kind of wrapping up everything he's learned in that school over the last couple of years, mostly not taught by teachers, but taught by his friends and his family, the people around him, what he's learned. And it's really a touching scene. It's quite lovely. So I knew where I was going to go. And then there's a storyline with the fox, the little girl played by Sophia Powers, who's just brilliant. That they were kind of a poor, tough family. The kids got in a lot of trouble, and her older brother is slipping into a real life of crime. And she finds herself wanting to protect her younger brother from getting involved in that. So that was a story I wanted to tell with her. And then with Mike, my brother, him coming into his own manhood, and then he had a relationship with this girl. I wanted to tell that story. So I knew what stories I wanted to tell. And then it's a matter of looking, okay, we have 13. I'll do this one here, that one here, that one, to give it a nice arc for all the characters. So yeah, going into it, I'd have, before we ever started anything, I'd have the skeleton of the 13 before we actually did anything, you know? So
Occasionally,
I want to know where we're going.
occasionally, as a sitcom develops through the course of a season or seasons, some actors come out stronger and become a bigger part of what you might have thought they were going to be, and that might change, or would it change the direction that sometimes the stories that you would take, or the importance that that character would take on?
Well, yeah, you know, you always run the risk of getting Fonzied or something if one character takes on in an amazing way. But I think we have all really strong actors, you know.
Yeah,
and
it's a great cast.
And the thing is, you know, I tell you one thing: the focus was always going to be on Mark and his story, and basically everybody else is there supportive. But the family ended up being so strong, performance-wise, ended up really writing more to them as well, and getting into more personal stories that way, because I just love the dynamic of the ensemble so much. So really, instead of one person, it's sort of like that whole family became, I always look at it as the house is the Starship Enterprise and school is the planet he beams down to and fights the aliens, and then he comes back to the Enterprise at the end, you know? So that's great. And I mean, we have wonderful actors like Nora McClellan, who plays the sister, the nun, the principal, Sister Rose. She was such a great find that we wrote far more for her than we initially intended. And so these are the things. It's like a toolbox, you know. These are the tools you have, and you're like, okay, I'm going to use this one, or the colors you had to paint with. It's an embarrassment of riches in many ways, in that we have such a wonderful ensemble cast, both at the school and in the house. So we want to give everybody a good storyline, and everybody deserves a good storyline and deserves something to have as their party piece when they're doing the season. So I think we were able to feed everybody a bit.
Well, not only does the cast gel on camera, I get the feeling that off camera there's a real warmth and a camaraderie as well.
Oh, we're always together. We do things over at my house, and we'll, the Benjamin is a huge, and Malcolm are huge Liverpool football supporters. So we will watch all the games together at the local pub, and then we're always spending time together in different groups. Anytime on a weekend when we're not filming, some group of us is together with the other group. And it's lovely to see, because we've become so close and such a loving relationship. Then when you're acting, you can take way more chances. You feel comfortable. Like nobody is self-conscious acting on that set. And that's a wonderful gift that friendship brings.
Yeah, and the last thing you want is for somebody to be intimidated by another cast member, right?
You know, and everybody could be very intimidated by Malcolm coming in, but boy, oh boy, does he ever put people at ease, you know? And he's such a loving person and is so good with the boys. And that's just a great, wonderful thing to have. And that's been the true gift for everybody on the show, I think. It's just, we've really lucked into a good bunch of people who are really caring, compassionate folks.
Well, I suggest that people tune in for the season 3 premiere, Tuesday, January 9th, 8:30 on CBC. It's also available on CBC Gem, Son of a Critch. Mark Critch, thanks very much for your time, and I wish you all the best. I look forward to the next 12 episodes.
Thank you so much. It's been a real joy. I really appreciate it.
All right, you take care.
All the best now.
That'll do it for another edition. Thank you all for tuning in. And do you tune in when you listen to podcasts? I guess you do. I'm not sure. What you're. Thanks for dropping in. Just thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And thanks for those who have taken the time to drop by our website and leave your comments and your questions. And we appreciate that. And it is www.tedwallison.ca. And don't forget, fill out your organ and tissue donation card when you're online, and you could change or even save a life. And have a great week.
The Ted Wallison Podcast has been brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices. It's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. The Ted Wallison Podcast is produced by Becky Coles. That's me. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. To talk to Ted and for more information on his podcast and our sponsors, go to www.tedwallishin.ca.